Welcome back to Earth Station Trek, a show where we trek from the early days on NBC to the future on Paramount Plus and everywhere in between. I'm Charles Kelso, and it's my privilege to introduce the Earth Station Trek crew. Keith Johnson.
Greetings and felicitations.
Alan Seiler.
How's it going?
Veronica Daschle.
Hi.
And we're joined by a very special guest today, Andreea Kindryd. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Now you've got so much history that I want to talk about. I mean, you worked at Desilu in the 60s with Gene Coon and all the others that we're familiar with who working on Star Trek. You knew Malcolm X, you knew Martin Luther King. The list just goes on. So I sort of wanted to start with sort of how you got into Hollywood and then how that sort of led you to Desilu.
Okay. I'd been in New York for a while. I sort of ran away to New York, and I was depressed because Martin was now out of jail and we weren't making it above the fold in the papers anymore. Malcolm was going overseas. Elijah Muhammad had kicked him out of the Nation of Islam. I felt like civil rights wasn't moving. So I dragged myself back home to California, where I got very much involved in Augustus Owsley Stanley's acid. And love-ins and be-ins.
Right.
And I was at one, and all of a sudden I got news of Watts had exploded, and I knew it was more than time. We had just Prop 14 had just passed, which had gotten rid of housing covenants, and now they voted them back in again, and we were pissed off. The police were like an invading army. The Parker, the police chief, militarized the police. He stopped having black and white officers serve together and segregated them and separated them. And it was just getting worse and worse and worse. And it exploded. So I got back there as fast as I could. And as a result of Watts, I got an invitation to Desilu for a job interview because they realized that there were no black jobs happening around there. Desilu was mostly the janitor, the cooks, the cleaners, the actors who played the janitors, the cooks.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they hired two of us, because like with any zoo or new place, you want to hire a couple so they can have company for each other. So we went to work at Desilu. And my short skirts got me the job on Star Trek. Gene Coon loved women's legs. He thought the upper part of the thigh, was the sexiest thing on earth.
Wow. Okay. Yeah,
and that's how I got to Desilu.
Okay. Yeah, Gene Coon is sort of a legendary figure to us, but he's a man who, he passed away sadly before Star Trek came back and had conventions and things like that. So we never really got to hear his story at conventions. We never really got to hear his autobiography like so many other people on Star Trek. But you worked right there with him. You knew him very well.
I did. And that's one of the reasons why I had to write the story. And when I started, I was just going to write about Gene. And I kept creeping in. And so that's why there are this one. If you guys don't want to know the rest of it, you can just have this, and that's most of the Star Trek. But this one has not only everything that's in that one, but a heck of a lot more. So Gene's dad was a Klansman.
Okay.
My ancestors were slaves.
Right.
What benefit is that?
Absolutely.
I did not know that about Gene Coon till I read that where you had written. That was a shock to me.
Did you read what I'd written?
Yeah, what you provided for Charles and us to read, and I read that about when it said.
I'm glad you did.
Oh yes.
Yeah. and it said Gene Coon was the son of a Klansman. I did not know that, and I grew up in Texas in the late 60s and early 70s. So I had a friend whose grandfather was a Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan in Texas.
Wow.
And that makes some interesting conversations, let's just say.
Right. Yeah.
Well, my ancestors were slaves in Texas. My family established the one of the early Texas freedom colonies called Shankleville. It's still there. They do the Purple Hull Pea Festival every year, and people come from all over Texas to Shankleville. And that's where I come from. Gene's father was in the Midwest, and they had a different focus. They were anti-Catholic. They weren't so worried about Black people because there weren't very many around.
Right.
Wow.
So they went after the Catholics and saw them as the disturbing factor. And so that's where they were.
Wow.
So, and Roddenberry's dad was a bigot.
Yeah.
I mean, that's been documented in other people's books.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. So they were rebellious sons. They were rebelling against all of that. That's why we all came together so well. We had one of the most diverse shows on television, both on screen and off screen.
Absolutely. To this day.
Yeah.
So that's how I came to be there.
Wow. And now, once you were there, I mean, you had the opportunity to work with, Dorothy Fontana, Harlan Ellison, Theodore Sturgeon. I mean, the list just goes on and on. I couldn't stop reading your book because it was just story after story about these folks who, I mean, were, names in a book and names on the credit screen to me for so long, and people I'd seen on the screen, and it's just some fascinating things about them.
Well, people like DeForest Research, Joan Pierce. Now that's a woman you guys would love to have had. She knew everything. She was our head reader. And I get really pissed off when I read other people's, the guys' books, and they say, his assistant, Joan Pierce. Assistant, my ass. If Helen hadn't had Joan, he wouldn't have had a business.
Yes.
Steel mind trap. Oh, God, that woman's brilliant. And Peter Sloman, he also was there at Star Trek. He came in at 17.
Oh, wow.
That's amazing.
And he was tipping around because it's one of the first things he had to do was tell Gene Coon that he'd stolen the story for his for Arena.
Right.
No, it was an accident. It wasn't intended. It's just that you are all the experiences that you've had and what you've read. And he wrote Arena, not realizing how closely it was to another science fiction story.
Right.
Which also Twilight Zone did the same thing with the same story, and that's your Gorns in Arena.
Yeah.
And when Peter found it out, he wanted to tell, and he told me, I said, well, tell him. And he said, I can't. So he went to Kellum and said, Kellum, will you call Gene? Because Gene looked formidable.
Oh, yeah.
He was an ex-Marine.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
He looked tough and grouchy. But that wasn't who he was.
Oh.
And so his family grew up in, on near Indian Nation land where they had been put away. So he had all that in him. And Roddenberry had all that in him. And those guys let it all out on Star Trek.
It's a question I think is very interesting. You're saying with you coming from the Black experience and the daughter of slaves, and you had the men and women who were children of Klansmen and bigots and so forth. But was there an undercurrent of anger in the writing, or was it just an undercurrent of agreement? We just need to do better, because sometimes people will come from a place of anger, but I don't really feel anger in Star Trek.
They weren't angry. I don't believe they were angry. I believe that they came from a place of, in a sense, privilege, and they were able to express these things without fear. And as far as their limited ability to do that, it could have been further, it could have been more, but they were still human beings.
Absolutely.
Like to say, they were perfectly human. So, yeah.
So what you have is people who, as you said, with Gene and Gene, the Genes, they acknowledge the realities and harsh. Yeah, they acknowledge the realities and harshness of the world, but they didn't want to write with anger. They wanted to write with kind of love and hope and say, this is how bad it is and was, but it can be better. And that's a good place to write from and create from.
Yeah, I think so.
And you refer to Gene Roddenberry as the bird often throughout the book.
Great bird of the galaxy. Of course, I keep saying Gene Roddenberry, Gene Coon, Gene Roddenberry.
Right.
Gene Coon.
Yeah. Well, was that common at Desilu in the 60s? Did people call him that? Or was that...
I can't remember that it was common. Bob Justman started it. Bob started a lot of stuff like that. His memos were usually the funniest of all the memos.
I've read a lot of Bob Justman memos, and they're legendary even to this day for his witty memos.
Yes.
Was he funny in real life, Bob Justman?
Yeah, he was. And I was pretty cranky with him when I read his book because it pissed me off really so much that he would put that crap on me.
Right.
And write about something that somebody else had written about in a flattering way. And to me, it felt demeaning. And I know he wasn't deliberate with that. But again, it was just that lack of his language. When he talked about, we could have bought her for less. I mean, come on. You're talking about negotiating a contract with Nichelle, and you're saying, we could have bought her for less. It sounds like you're buying bodies at the market.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So little things like that. But it was the time, guys. It was how we thought then. I probably thought, well, I questioned myself all the way through the book. Who taught me that? I did that. Who did I see doing that? Who was I imitating here? Because Malcolm, when Kuringa and I first met Malcolm, in fact, I heard from Kuringa last week. He says he's very thrilled that I mentioned him in my book.
Wow.
Anyhow, when we met him, he was giving a talk at a church. Not the first time we met, but after we met him, we went to this talk at the church, and it was, "Who taught you to hate yourself?" And it was directed at Black people. Who taught you to hate your nose? Who taught you to hate your lips, the color of your skin? Who taught you to hate yourself? And so that resonated with me. That was 1962, probably.
Okay.
And it's still bouncing in my head.
Wow.
That's a pretty heavy question, because that's a thing that, like, you don't realize that's something you're actually taught.
Yes. And we do it unconsciously. And if we look at, when I talk about the Shatner, my daughter Paula, if you're in Vegas, you'll meet Paula, because she grew up on the set. And when she came running to read that part, she came running into my office, having been in Bill's office, and she's crying hysterically. And I don't know what's happening, but my kid, I'm like, what is it? Mommy, Bill. And I'm thinking, oh, fuck, he's dead. What is it? And she's just, I thought, oh, shit. She got into his dressing room. He didn't have his hairpiece on. I mean, and I thought jokes, people who wore hairpieces were jokes, and we should laugh at them. Black people, jokes, laugh at them. Gay people, well, you always knew them because their wrist was going to be limp. All these ridiculous ideas that I carried around, and on Star Trek, we were challenging them. The ridiculousness of them.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Were there any stories that were told through Star Trek while you were there that stuck out with you that really stood up?
A couple. It was maybe Let This Be Your Last Battlefield, which was pretty blatant, obvious, but some people need blatant and obvious.
Right.
That's true.
And I look now and I think, are we moving there? Because they destroyed that whole planet. Are we moving there in America?
Right.
That scares the heck out of me.
Yeah.
I love my big rock, Devil in the Dark. What is it? Colonization and I think Captain Cook came here and took a land and had the nerve to say it was uninhabited.
Right.
Yes, there were no people there. What about all those black people all over the whole country? There were no people here.
Right.
Okay, so that, and then again, they turned the Horta into the, I don't know how to say it. It's sort of like that shiny Negro who you saw in Green Mile and all those the magical. What can you help me here?
The magical Negro.
The magical Negro.
Yes. You know what? I got to tell you, this is so funny. When we talked about the Devil in the Dark, I think I said this here. I always said what was ironic at the end is they said that the Horta and her children who could burrow through rock were beneficial to the humans because they exposed all those expensive minerals. And they kind of said they benefited each other. And I'm like, but the humans aren't benefiting the Horta.
No.
Just go away.
And the Horta was so generous. It's dying and it tells them where to find the pump. All that sacrificing. Oh, you were such a good boy.
Even as a kid, I thought that. I'm like, they were like, it's beneficial to both. It's not beneficial to the Horta.
No.
Okay, so I had to say these things. I mean, I tried to write about, but the intersectionality, my being a Black woman at the age I was, at the time I was, and what the atmosphere was like in the world, it was not the same view that anybody else that I knew that wrote about it had. So I had to tell all of it. And tell me what you think about the book, guys. Come on, I'm insecure.
I loved it. I mean, I thought it was just full of, I mean, every turn, it's a fascinating story about someone either on Star Trek or someone who was in that area at that time, not even necessarily involved with Star Trek, but people from, the civil rights movement, people from other ends of Hollywood. I mean, you were sort of right there, ground center, and, Hollywood and LA, in the 1960s, which is a period that I find incredibly fascinating anyway. But with a lot, like you say, a very different perspective than what we usually hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think of it, Keith?
I loved it too, and it was funny. Just before we started recording, I was really fascinated by your family history. Going way back to the slavery and so forth. And I love the anecdote about the incident with the men that were, I think it said they were there to honestly either rape or of a slaughter or sex, I think it was said, and how your ancestor came out with a shotgun and basically took care of business. And we were laughing because then the next line was, and that was the first person in our family to migrate to California.
You laugh because that's I try to make sure that I can find some humor in things.
You have to.
And so first of all, my grandson said, "Grandma, I'm a father now. Who are our people? I want to know about our people so I can tell my kids." So I had to dig out the slave love story and tell them about the background. And in the full book, I talk about the next two generations as well. But for this one, I made it briefer. And then my another grandson said, "Grandma, who introduced you to Martin Luther King and Malcolm X?" And so I had to tell that story. And then my granddaughter said, "Grandma, I've been watching Star Trek. I never saw you on it. What did you do?" So I started putting that together, and I just was not able to write. I'm a big mouth. I like to talk. I run my mouth and I do all the things my mother said. She said, "Shut up and sit down." Well, I don't. I like to do the opposite. I made it into a solo show. And I would go on stage and I would tell from slavery to Star Trek all the stories. And I ended up at the Adelaide Fringe Festival. And then somebody there saw me and said, "Oh, you got to come to Edinburgh." And I said, I heard about people going to Edinburgh. They come back home with big credit card bills and no money. I'm not going. Anyhow, he kept up and finally convinced me to go. And I did go, and I did come home with money. So it was just this shutdown where I couldn't go anywhere for 2 years. And if they told me it was going to take this long to write it, I probably wouldn't have started. I did.
Wow.
And I'm so glad you guys like it. Thank you so much.
Well, and I love the story of it's funny, in a time we joke sometimes where everybody's on social media and people don't want to get face to face, and you have people sometimes who won't go across the block to meet somebody. And the story of a man who traveled across the country and risked being captured and killed and put himself back into slavery to find his wife and children. That's a story. I mean, that's a story a lot. I can't imagine putting myself back into slavery, willingly going back into slavery, but he had to find his wife and his children, and they made it work and they survived. And that's amazing.
They weren't even his children. Because in those days, the slave owners, check the names of those kids.
That's right.
Owners they manufactured their new stock themselves.
That's right. You're right. Because you actually said in the book, I take that back. You actually said in the book to the effect of what they visited their people. They visited them. And due to the skin color, you're right. It was pretty well understood. Those were the slave master's children.
Yeah.
But that was just such an amazing story thinking about that.
Yeah. I'm just so thrilled that that's in my family and that we've had that story. What's his name? The big tall guy on morning television in America, former football player.
Michael Strahan?
Yeah. So he's one as well. He's a Shankleville a person as well.
Really?
Yeah. I didn't know that.
So when they did Who Do You Think You Are, whatever they call it in America, they traced his ancestry back to Winnie in Shankleville. So Jim Shankle wasn't my ancestor. Winnie Shankle was. And Jim Shankle and Winnie Shankle are his ancestors.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
But they had several more children together. And that's why when they established Shankleville, they had a whole bunch of people ready.
So a question I have for you. You were talking about, I thought you said something very interesting about how they would call the people who work behind the scenes as track assistants. And sometimes that word doesn't do justice to what the people did. I forget the name, but there's a politician's wife who wrote a book a few years ago. And the title of the book is "And His Lovely Wife," because she said everywhere they went, they would just say, here's Congressman so-and-so and his lovely wife. Right. As if she had no personality. So, so when you were saying it made me think that y'all have kind of a bond with all the people who were the assistants and the behind the scenes producers, the people whose names weren't up front all the time, that you guys kind of talk and bond together because of that?
I'm wondering. We did have connections. I hung out with the DeForest research people. I like smart people. I hung out mostly with them. We were all, no, I don't know if there was a bond, but Charlie Washburn on the set, Star Trek Charlie, or Charlie Star Trek, because he had the phone, Charlie Star Trek. And so he got on with everybody and blended, and the crew worked well together. It was like we had a higher calling in a sense. Right. And there was that, but there were also, and I mentioned this, the Malibu divide, because at certain levels on the set were people who would have been in the hills, and on the set there were also people who would have been on the beach. The social liberals were on the beach. The very redneck folks were in the hills. That's how it was. When I lived in Malibu, my daughter never got called that name so many times when we lived in Beverly Hills or in Nichols Canyon. But on the bus going to school in Malibu, she got called it. So Nichelle felt it more than I did, because I didn't go on. I went on the set. I went specifically to George, Nichelle, where I was next door at Mission, hanging out with Greg and those guys. But there was that divide there, but it wasn't overt, and everybody, I think, joined together to do the best job they could for the show.
Absolutely.
Jerry Finnerman, some of the stuff he did with his lighting, oh my God. It wasn't until I went to film school and had to study camera movement and lighting that I could appreciate to the depth that I do now what he did there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's no show that looks like Star Trek.
Right.
That's true.
A lot of it is that lighting, and it's so distinct.
Yes.
Right.
And Wachang.
Yeah.
I love that he and Bob would get together and talk, because the unions were not going to let him join the union. The prop unions, they were part of that divide. They were feeling threatened that their unions were under assault by these people who wanted to get in, and they had it their way for so long.
Right.
Nepotism ruled. And that's how you got into all of those unions. So every time Walter would come in, I would love to see what he had this time.
It's one thing when you're saying that with yourself and all the others, I think everybody here would agree, is Star Trek is probably one of the first shows where I knew about more than just the creator. Listen to the names we've put out: Gene Roddenberry, Gene Coon, Jerry Finnerman, Justman, what's his name? Matt Jeffries for the Jeffries.
Jeffries,
yeah. And it's probably one of the few shows, especially back then, where you knew the names of the creator, the producer, the associate producer. Heck, I even won a trivia thing one time because I knew that at the end it was Glenn Sound. I mean, and we just go deep in and you mentioned Jerry Finnerman. I know Charles too can say there's a episode Metamorphosis, the one that deals with Zeppelin Cochrane.
Oh, yes.
And that is often held up as the most beautiful Star Trek episode because of how Jerry Finnerman shot it. Yeah. And I think, Charles, I don't know if it's your favorite episode, but what's your favorite looking episode?
Yeah, I don't know if it's my absolute favorite, but I champion that episode because it's not one that people think of as one of the best episodes, but it's so incredible to look at, especially now that they've remastered it. I'm just always in awe about that episode. So I'm always cheerleading it.
And think about how little money we had.
Right.
And how many effects we pulled up with that little budget.
I feel like a lot of the time, though, the tiny budget shows, they have to be more creative. So they come up with more creative stuff because they have to. And then those types of things tend to stand the test of time.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that part about Peter Sloman, he's agonizing. What is it, Ed? Peter, what is it? Oh, I'm trying to get the grammar. The grammar, it's wrong. Peter, nobody speaks Vulcan. They won't know the difference.
But little did you know.
And then he looked at me with that look, which is, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to give it all I got. I don't care if people know or not because I'm going to know.
Yeah. Exactly.
And that was what was special.
Wow. Yeah.
So great.
And over the course of your career, you were the assistant to both Martin Luther King Jr. and Gene Coon. And so I'm wondering, as you go through life, I mean, we all have bosses that you work for, some good, some bad. They have their good and bad points. I mean, how would you compare those guys as bosses? I mean, how were they as people to work with?
Oh no.
That's saying that one. They were a lot alike in many ways. My experience with Martin was short. I was only his PA, just temporarily. So I mean, don't give me any longevity credit there because I didn't have any. I was lucky to be with him for the time I was.
Right.
Man could tell jokes. Wow. Anyhow, with Gene Coon and Martin Luther King, they both had a person in common that they respected, admired, and followed. And it was the same person. What's his name? Guys, tell me what his name was again. Serenity Prayer, Niebuhr, Reinhold Niebuhr. Is that it? Yeah. He's a philosopher, a minister. He taught at Union Theological College. And he was someone that both of those men esteemed. And that they shared the same kind of thinking and feeling.
Right. Were they nice?
They both teased me a lot.
Well, that's a sign of affection, so.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
and more than that, I remember when I came off my motorcycle and I came limping into the office, sort of blood running down my leg and holding my arm because I banged my arm, and I was wearing my motorcycle jacket that I'd gotten from I run out of words sometimes. The star of the show we were working on at Universal, and it was a racing jacket, Goodyear jacket, because he'd gotten it with Paul Newman in this film he'd been on with him. And so that was fine. But I was bloody all over, and I sort of got there, and I stood in his office, and he looked up at me, and he said, "You know, Andy, you do anything for an excuse when you're late." And then he paid all my doctor bills.
Oh,
Wow.
Because I had no health insurance.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah.
I heard that's not unfamiliar in America.
Mm.
All right.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Covered here.
Yeah.
So when you first got there, did you and Gene get on well? When you first started, did it take you a while to get into the flow and meld and mesh with everyone there? Because it sounds like such an interesting
I didn't
time.
go right away. I was the floater secretary when I started. So I would go and work on all the series, all around the lot, every department, everywhere, casting, art, whatever.
Wow.
And so I had gone in to work with him a few times before I ended up working with him. So we'd already started feeling each other out. And so by the time he said, "I really like your mini skirts. I love your legs. Why don't you come work for me?" And I thought, do I really want to work for a middle-aged white dude called Coon?
Wow. Wow.
And the answer was, "It pays more money." Okay.
Pretty much.
Right.
No, but we got on fine. As we spent time together, we got to know each other better and better. And when he left the show, he let me know that he didn't want to go without me. That he wanted to come and work with him wherever he was going to be.
Wow.
Aw.
So I said, okay. And then I stayed with John Meredith Lucas. But when Fred came in, I thought, nah, let Fred get his own person, because I'm not going to be here. I'm going to be gone. So I left.
Wow.
Okay, because that was the change. There was a change in producers. That was the change, and there'd been the change in the ownership. Desilu no longer really what officially owned.
That's right.
It went to Gulf and Western, Paramount. Things changed.
Yeah, it wasn't the same atmosphere. That changed. No, it had been sort of family-like with Lucy there.
Right.
But once it became them, it became very formal. So I knew I didn't really want to stay there.
So you saw the writing.
Yeah. I wanted to be with Gene. I was having fun with him.
Yeah.
And I was learning, and I was hopeful that one day, by that time, I was saying, maybe, possibly, I might be able to be a producer one day. See, there was no role models. There were no people I could see that had that path. And women didn't have it. Blacks didn't have it. Asians didn't. We didn't have it. People of color didn't have it. And we didn't have it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know we talk about when the series Susan Oliver became a director, which was something back in the day. She was a pilot as well, and that was just so rare to see people like that at that time.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I do have another question, and this is one of those cliche questions that you always ask people, and the answer can't possibly be yes. But when you all were working on it, when you're working in Star Trek, obviously I think you knew you were doing something important. But did anybody really have an inkling that it was going to become what it has become over the decades? I don't see how you could have, actually. Yeah.
Oh, wait. I think I commented about that. I said, and did we spend evenings sipping Gene Milosevich and me with a Tab Cola? Those are nasty drinks. God, they were awful.
I remember Tab.
Talking about what we would be doing on our 50th anniversary. Nah.
Yeah.
We were just there at that moment doing the best we could with what we were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah, you all did a great job, because we grew up loving the show. I mean, we're still talking about it to this day.
Yeah.
And I remember Stephen Whitfield's The Making of Star Trek was the first making of a TV show book I ever read when I was probably 11 years old. And that was the point that, my Star Trek heroes weren't just Kirk and Spock and Uhura. It was, Gene Roddenberry and Gene Coon and Dorothy Fontana, and, just seeing the show in a different way, and thinking about it in a different way. That was really formative for me in the way I look at television. When I was a small child, I didn't think of it as something that people made. It was just TV. It was just on. It's just the stories. But, having to sit down and think about the decisions that were made and people who were working to bring this show to life. And, it's exciting that, to talk to you, because you were there, and, thank you for all the work that you did on it.
Oh, thank you.
I have a question about the book. And I'm just curious. I know that this is something you had been planning to do, and then COVID comes along and it gives you the opportunity to stop all the other things and you get to focus on it. What was your process like as far as like collecting all of these memories and all of these stories and putting them down? What was, how did you kind of approach organizing your thoughts about this whole thing?
I was very, very fortunate that I have a very, very supportive partner. And I met him when I was doing stand-up comedy. I had my daughter committed suicide. And so I became a stand-up comic, as you do. It was either that or kill myself. So
right.
I went to laughter because I'd heard that laughter is healing. And I wasn't that great a stand-up comic, but I was adequate. And I met this guy. And he's a bit young, so I didn't pay much attention. But so now, 15 years later, we're still hanging out together. And he was the one who said, I'd be telling stories like this, like we're doing right now. And he said, you got some good stories. Tell the one about. And pretty soon, the kids asking me about family, civil rights, and Star Trek, it came together. And so I started talking it and sitting on stage. I just sit on stage and with a glass of water and wander around and talk and tell stories. So that was the process. It came from that. And having had that, I just made it bigger and took it further, because there is that part of me wanting now to become a producer. But there's so many things that are going to be against me that, so I do cover that. I go into how all the rejections, and then how when I got to Australia, I finally was able to achieve my goal.
Wow.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about that journey, that journey in yourself to move from the States to Australia and finding more opportunities and different shores there than what you had back in the States?
Well, when you get my book, when that finally comes out, you'll see I was pissed off so many times. Gene said to me, I said, I want the associate producer's job, Gene. I've been hanging out with Melvin Van Peebles.
Oh, sweet back.
Yes. I had seen Story of the 3-Day Pass. And I walked past, and there's this guy sitting out in front of the commissary at Universal in fatigues with boots unlaced, with a singlet or undershirt on in the sun. I thought, how improper is that? Properly. And then I looked again, and it was Melvin Van Peebles, and I didn't care. I saw Story of 3-Day Pass. So anyhow, hanging with him, I started to see he saw unlimited. He didn't see any barriers. I started to think, well, why not? Why not? I like post-production. Gene doesn't like associate producer's going to handle it. I can do this. So I asked Gene for the post-production job. And when he came back, the answer was no. And the reason was because men on the dubbing stage would have to watch their language if there was a woman present.
Wow. Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
That wasn't my response, but yes.
Right.
Look, I know women who can blister paint with what they say. So
yeah. So that it was then again and again. And then the next thing was women. I thought I believe in women's movement. And so the women in film was being organized. And by that time, my best friend was Rosalind Heller, who was the first woman to head a studio when she went to Columbia, and she became the vice president there. So she said, you got to come, and all these women join together. And I said to this woman there, God, I'm so glad we can do this together. I said, because as a Black woman, she said, oh, being Black doesn't count. It was just the fact that you're a woman. And before I hit her, I left. Because I started trying to explain to her intersectionality, which I didn't know existed then, because we didn't have the word. But I was trying to explain to her, and more she was singing, and she became one of the most powerful women in Hollywood. I just hope that she mentored some Black women sometime. One day I might ask her. But yeah. So then I went to work with the BBS, the Easy Rider people. They were the cool, because I was hanging out with Jane Fonda in the anti-war group. She and Donald Sutherland had started, and it was full of all these actors and things. So I was hanging out with them. And so I got a job working at BBS on a feature film with Jack Nicholson. And I was the worst treatment I ever had in my life because I'm competent, I was capable. But I got treated so bad by a guy who kept saying, I don't know why you people want to integrate. Why don't you just buy your own? And I got this constantly from him. So, and then the woman tells me that I was just gone. Yeah. So I just took off with my husband at that time. I married him a week after I married him 2 weeks after Bill Russell and I had gone to the show. See, I can't help it. These people were in my life. And so I'd gone to this television show with Bill Russell, and I met this guy, and 2 weeks later I married him. And he got a job working in Hong Kong. Oh. So after the child was born, by the way, my daughter was born on Malcolm X's assassination day.
Oh, wow.
The same day, the same date, the same time of day.
Wow.
So she's Malika for Malik, inshallah, God's will. So we took off for Hong Kong, and this con was going on. These guys were promising all this money to make films because they wanted. I met them when I was at AFI, and they gave me money and said we're going to make a film, but they were just a con artist. They were just giving Black people money to make businesses and taking all the money back in terms of fees for helping them do the thing, and then declaring them bankrupt and then writing off the whole thing. So I twigged to what was going on. I was already in Hong Kong, so I said, I'm going to go find myself a project, and I'm going to make a film with this money. And so I hit the hippie trail. And after I left Nepal, I went back to Hong Kong. A guy I met in Bali said, come and live with me. So I went to Bali, showing up with him, and he lived in Australia. And Leslie Uggams had said to me, do not go to Australia. And I said, I'm going to Hong Kong. She said, don't go to Australia. Okay, why? And she said, white Australia policy. I'm married to an Australian. I can't live there because I'm Black. They have a white Australia policy. Well, luckily, by the time I got there, they had gotten rid of that. And the Black people there were rising up and demanding their rights. They'd only gotten the vote about 10 years before that.
Wow.
So I decided, this is my place. This is where I'm supposed to be. I'm going to make a film about these people. Because every film about them had been made by someone who was not Black. And it would be a first Black. The indigenous, there was one film before me that was by a local guy, but I was the first other person. So I made a film about them, and I got my producer's credit. Yes. And I also have directing credit, which I never wanted because I was terrified to direct, and it won prizes.
Oh,
wow.
Nice.
Fantastic.
Yeah. What was the film called?
It's called Chintu Pakani in language. It's called Sunrise Time of Awakening.
Okay.
Wow.
Because I was such an idiot and know nothing that I thought, what's this Dreamtime stuff about? Come on, man. Wake up. We got to get going. We can't do no dreaming. I didn't understand.
Yeah.
But still, the film, in fact, I've gotten recently, I had a couple more people asked to use clips from it. So it's sampled. The film is sampled a lot.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's really cool.
So I think I talked a lot.
And you've been there for what, 5 decades now? Australia, is that correct?
Yeah, just about. I've lived in Australia longer than I've lived in America.
Wow.
Amazing. How often do you get back to the States?
I used to do it every year, but I haven't been back since COVID. I canceled that year, and they kept my money.
Wow. That stinks. Well, I don't want to put you on the spot, because I know this is very recent, but I did want to ask you about working with Nichelle Nichols. And if you don't want to talk about that right now, then I understand. But just the fact that you're here and that you knew her, and I was wondering if you'd be interested in talking about her, or like I said, if not, that is perfectly fine.
He said that we were ex-wives-in-law. Because her ex-husband and my ex-husband both married Jeannie, the same woman. So
Right.
Nichelle said we were ex-wives-in-law.
Wow.
She was very special to me. I talk mostly. I do say mostly the things I had to say about her in the book. I guess I don't know if I would have done anything any different. But she was a role model and a friend. She was a relative, and she was a strict teacher. Nichelle wasn't afraid to say what she thought and what she felt. She was a generous, wonderful person who I thought had lousy taste in men.
That happens sometimes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
And the happiest thing was when I moved out of Nichols Canyon, I talked her into moving into the house that I had lived in. Nichelle has got to live in Nichols Canyon.
Right.
And she did. But she was like, my aunt was probably the most famous Black woman songwriter that you've never heard of. And she was very, very, very successful, but very little known. And she and Nichelle shared the same kind of totally cool. Butter would not melt. She was so cool. And so Nichelle felt like family to me, and I could drop by because she didn't live that far away. I could drop by. I gave her advice, especially when Ivan was chasing me down and trying to get my knickers off. Nichelle was there to be support. It was like she'd gone there, and so she knew what the woods looked like, so I wouldn't get lost.
Yeah. Wow.
She said you talked earlier and you were joking about how your legs helped you get the job working with Gene Coon. And I thought it was funny that Miss Nichols had written about your legs, and she said you had legs that Tina Turner would have envied.
I like that.
Yeah, I thought that was great.
But and then you saw that Bob Justman wrote that same story?
He did. He wrote the same story?
In his book, he writes the same story. Only he says that he doesn't mention my legs. He said that he hired me for Gene Coon. Bullshit. He said that he heard me answer the phone in a way that similar to the way I did answer it every now and again, but not exactly. And he said I had a thick cornpone accent. And okay, I was born in the South, San Diego. So it wasn't exactly a cornpone accent, and then he accused me of sleeping with a basketball player who claimed to have slept with thousands and thousands of women.
Wow.
And what she had it right, but he didn't. It wasn't Will Chamberlain. I was friends with Bill Russell. But they're both Black and they both play basketball, so I guess he could mix that up.
Wow.
Oh.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. I'm trying to be polite. I love Bob. There, he had those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what you have to put up with when you're that person that I was then.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you look back? Because you're in a lot of ways you're looking back and you're looking forward. Do you look back and go, I can't believe the journey I've had? I mean, because I talk a lot, as a Black man, we talk a lot about racism and stuff. And as we know, the world it's in a bad state right now. And I've had some younger Black people talk to me and they'll say, oh, it's awful and this and that. And I'll say, as bad as it is, I grew up right at civil rights time. And as bad as civil rights was, we had the Civil War. And as bad as the Civil War was, there was a time when Black people couldn't vote and women couldn't vote and gay people couldn't marry. Do you look back and see the journey and see that you've done well and that things have gotten better for you? And are you positive now still?
Well, my feeling is that when we're able to take personal responsibility for our actions and we ask ourselves, who taught me that? And is that really how things are? That it's going to make a big change. And I think Star Trek is important in that place because we did encourage people to go that direction. I like the new series. I'm hopeful with that new series that we could return to some of those ideas because it's an individual thing. And where you put your attention is the response that your brain is going to get, where you put what you focus on. Right. And so I'm focusing on, we are all connected some kind of way, some place. We may not have the same politics, but we both like dogs. We got to build on that.
Right.
That's all I can see is if we can do that. If we're going to demonize and lie, I wish America would say, you're not allowed to lie on television.
Right.
If you're supposedly telling facts that, I don't know, there's got to be some way to stop people telling lies that other people believe because they're, in their goodness of their heart, they're trying to protect those children that are being trafficked in the basement of the pizza parlors.
Right.
They're doing the best they can.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
We've got to help make access accessible and not condemn those people. I'm not saying I'm with they go low, we go high. I'm not saying that at all. I'm with a cheek. But I just think that I am for right, whoever says it. I am for justice, no matter who it's for. That's my beliefs, and I will carry that with me always. And if I don't stand up for what I believe in, then what the fuck am I good for?
Well said.
Yeah.
And amen. Well said. When you say that about finding something that you have in accordance, there's an episode of Star Trek, and I can't remember the name of this. There's an episode of the Star Trek: The Next Generation, and you guys may remember it's the one where they encounter that group of people who are like nomads, the Akamarians or something like that. It's one where Riker falls in love with a lady who's been alive for years, and she's assassinating people. but anyway, there's a thing where these two parties that are at odds say they have nothing in common, and Picard gets them to sit down and have, I think, tea or a drink, and they're like, we have nothing in common, and Picard literally says, we've at least agreed that we can sit down to have this tea, and we'll start there, as silly as that sounds.
Absolutely. Well, that's what happened to me after I made my film. I made another one, and then I just didn't, it wasn't working for me. And I got involved with some people that were taught conflict resolution skills. So I went and I did the conflict resolution course. And I noticed my second or third when I came home from school to work, I came home from work, and my daughter had the television on in her bedroom. And I said, you're supposed to be studying. And she said, fine. And she walked up and slammed the door. And I went, now, what did I learn in conflict resolution today? Oh, darling, when I come home from work, before I become mother, I would really like to have just a few moments to be me. And she said, oh, fair enough. And I thought, hey, this stuff works. So I became a conflict resolution trainer, and then I became a mediator. And as a mediator, I trained hundreds of other mediators. And that is from Star Trek. That's where I got it from, because when I heard about mediation back then, only lawyers could be mediators. And I thought, that's something I'll never be able to do. But then I found that I could, and I did, and I shared those skills. And that's where it's at. It's funny that my mother and I had if you saw my TED thing, my mother and I had a battle from when I was 4 and cut off my hair because I hated the way she did my hair. We had a hair war all our life. and so what happened then was I started doing conflict resolution, And I thought, I got to walk the talk. If I'm going to do this stuff, I can't be talking and then having arguments and disagreements. So I started working on my relationship with my mother. It took a couple of years, but one day she said to me, you know, my next door neighbor, I feel sorry for, she'd rather be right than happy. I went, whoa. She said, yes, I'm getting something out of this too.
My daughter is turning 16 next month, so I need some of that. I need to take one of those classes.
It makes a really big difference, and that's where I got it from. Was from Star Trek.
Wow.
That's where I heard about mediation and became a mediator.
What do you think is the important thing about Star Trek? What do you think its truest legacy is? All these years, almost 60 years down the road, what is the thing that is the most important thing to have come out of that show that it added to or taught society?
I think watchability. You can watch it and be entertained. And while you're being entertained, you're also being educated and informed. I think that's the most important thing.
That's so true.
Yeah.
That's so true. Balance of Terror still teaches you lessons about racism decades later with the Romulans.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're coming close to our time, but I wanted to ask you too about where your books, the two versions of the book that are coming out, or the two books that are coming out. Where and when do we know when people will be able to get their hands on them?
I'm taking this with me to Las Vegas. Okay. So there'll be some books there. It's my first effort. So I'm not satisfied. I want to clean up a couple of mistakes in there. There's a couple of photographs in there that are absolutely horrendous. Oh, God, I'm embarrassed. Anyhow, so I just want to get this. I want to know what you guys think about it. Do we like it? And this one is it's at the editor now to go through and to break it up into chapters and to smooth out some of. I didn't have a ghostwriter, so it's a really bumpy ride.
Okay,
as you can tell. So I'd say next month for this.
Okay.
And soon after for the other one.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
You have some wonderful pictures, by the way, reading up on you and looking at some of the things you've done. There was a couple I love. There's Uncle Leroy with Class. And
yes.
Those are great.
Those little former slave kids with their little bare feet. And do you see how many are pale as well?
Mm-hmm.
The color range in there, you can see that's why they were really wanted to go and kill off a lot of people, because they didn't want people to see what they've been doing.
Yeah. And then you had another one I thought was precious. It was Mia's Wonder Woman, and that's you on the little pony. I just love pictures like that because my folks are from the country too, so I got all those kind of pictures like that. Those are great pictures that take you back.
Yeah. I loved roller skating, so I have my picture of it's all the things I love. My family and me.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that.
If I can, okay, then I'm
absolutely.
I want to know. Feel free to tell me what you like.
I love the title, honestly. I love From Slavery to Star Trek because that says it all.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's definitely an attention-grabbing title.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And
so that was,
I was gonna say, and the book, I mean, it lives up to the title. I mean, it's exactly that. It's that story, and it's incredible. And I loved I keep saying this, but I loved all the anecdotes about all the people that you knew. I told myself I'm not going to sit here and just ask what every single person who worked at Desilu was like, because I'll do that the entire show.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been so great. Where can people find more information about you and about your books?
From slavery to Star Trek.com.